Welcome to Personal Landscapes. I'm your host, Ryan Murdoch. You can find links for today's episode and other conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. Film noir is my favorite silver screen genre. I've seen every A-list film noir multiple times, and most of the B movies too. I wanted to do a podcast conversation about it since I started Personal Landscapes. These downbeat stories of ordinary lives gone hopelessly astray crackle with hard-boiled dialogue. They're set in modern urban wastelands, usually at night, in claustrophobic rooms where the actors are framed in tight shots that create a mood of entrapment. The classic period only lasted from 1941 until the mid-1950s, but their visual style continues to influence movies today. Who better to speak to about it than the film historian who wrote the definitive study? Foster Hirsch is the author of 16 books on film and theater, including Film Noir, The Dark Side of the Screen, and Hollywood and the Movies of the 50s. He's a professor of film at Brooklyn College and a frequent moderator at repertory cinemas and film festivals. We spoke about film noir's roots in hard-boiled fiction, how German Expressionism shaped its aesthetic, and what was happening in the 1950s Hollywood as film noir and the studio system came to an end. One quick note before we jump in. Personal Landscapes relies on the support of listeners like you to keep going. I don't want it to come to an end like film noir did in the 50s. I want to keep these episodes paywall-free and ad-free, but I've also got to pay the bills and earn a little something for the time I put in. If you want to help, please consider joining my members club. You'll support the show and get cool book lover bonuses for less than the cost of a dry martini. Go to personallandscapespodcast.com to find out more. And now, here's my conversation about film noir with Foster Hirsch. You've described film noir as one of the richest and most critically neglected of American film genres. So how would you define or characterize it?
Well, are you reading from my book there?
Yes, that's a quote. Yeah.
Because remember, my book is a long time ago now. It was originally published in 1981 when film noir was not all that well known. And mine was one of the first books on the subject, actually. So I could say critically neglected when I wrote that decades ago, but that's no longer true. I have to go back now and update and revise the book. No, that's an inaccurate statement. Now it's one of the most critically lauded and recognized and examined and written about and viewed of all Hollywood kinds of entertainment. Is this an exaggeration to say that it's the most beloved of all the classic kinds of studio age movies? It's not neglected. It's changed. It's not neglected. It's highly thought of.
So what changed then in that time period to shift this view?
That's a fair question. I think some outposts like TCM. I think there have been film festivals about film noir. People like me had been advocating for how good these films are for a long time. I'm hardly alone. There's a whole brigade of us that do it. I do host film noir festivals, and I think it's. Would you say it's a generally well-known term? If you say film noir to any film literate person, wouldn't they know what you're talking about?
I think so. Yeah. You say that, to quote your book again, it's marked by a startling cynicism, often ending in defeat. These are downbeat stories of murder and passion, of ordinary lives gone hopelessly astray, of evil women casting their net and fatally contaminating the American male. That's really great. That really sums it up.
Okay, that sums it up. That last bit would now get me into trouble, and there are pockets of politically correct groups that oppose film noir because they accuse it of being misogynistic, and to some extent that's an accurate statement. But I think it's the earlier part of that definition that might account for the popularity, cynicism and downbeat. I think certainly in America now we're in that kind of a period where these films that are not affirmative and optimistic and upbeat catch the modern note. That in some ways these films seem sort of contemporary in their sensibility, if that makes sense, that the darkness that comes from film noir, dark or black film, speaks to a contemporary sensibility. My students understand the film, recognize the point of view of the film, don't have any trouble entering this dark world or the cynical world. as I say, there's some pushback about the treatment of women, and that is controversial and worth discussing. But that reflects, if I could put that in historical terms, film noir is basically a wartime genre. The film noir began, we can argue about the exact date, let's call it early 40s and post-war and into the 50s. And by the end of the 50s, what we now call the classic era of film noir is pretty much over. Now we have neo-noir, but it's a wartime sensibility. Films were released during the war and right after the war. And remember, in wartime, a lot of men were away and women went into business and left the domestic sphere. And that empowered women. Women were crucial to holding up the homes and business while a lot of men were away. And so after the war, when veterans came back and women were in positions of authority, there was some pushback and resentment and a feeling of a resentment of and fear of strong or recently empowered women. So, yes, these stories do have a misogynistic undertow. There are great and positive images of women in film noir, but a lot of the images are of the femme fatale, the wicked woman.
Did it also reflect a sort of a national disillusionment post-war as these guys
Yes,
came back from Europe having seen some of the most horrific things, and I could imagine it pulled the rug out from under what they thought the world was previous to that.
absolutely. Absolutely. The films represent a real shift in sensibility in American filmmaking. That's how they got their name. Your viewers may not know that. What's film noir, French term? Why is that being used to discuss an American film? It's because they weren't called film noir at the time. They were called thrillers or suspense films or crime films. But when they were released in a group in Paris after the war, because during the occupation, American films didn't play in Paris, and the Parisians were and still are the biggest film goers in the world. And they love American movies, and they watch them carefully and notice things that we don't notice. Some of the critics around Cahiers du Cinema, the influential film magazine, made the following assessment. This new group of films that we're seeing, these films lack the usual affirmation and sunniness and upbeat quality that we've come to identify as American. These films are kind of dark. So being French, we wouldn't give it an American name or English name. Let's give it a French name, film noir, dark film.
Those are my favorite film noir as well. The ones that somebody makes just one poor decision. Maybe it doesn't seem like a poor decision at the time, and their life just slides inexorably downward. Then there's no
Absolutely.
like there's just
Absolutely.
the grip
One
of fate.
bad timing, the grip of fate, bad timing, bad karma, one careless decision, one moment, and your life has changed utterly. It suggests how perilous the universe is. And that's a wartime sensibility, isn't it? I like to say that these are war films. They're not explicitly about the war, but they're war films in terms of the underlying qualities and tone.
So how did these new 1940s films differ from the crime films of the 30s that came
Well,
before them?
crime films of the 30s were primarily about gangster movies. The crime movie template originally was gangster. Little Caesar, Public Enemy, Scarface, the great triumvirate. But those films tended to tell the same story over and over again. That is the rise and fall of the gangster. And it though those three films I mentioned were very popular, the formula quickly wore out its welcome. And the crime film had to migrate to something different if it was going to last. And what I like about the film noir I like the best are the ones that I think you're referring to. They're not about gangsters or the syndicate. They're about regular law abiding folks just like you and me who slip into a bad fate, make a wrong decision, walk one block out of the way, meet somebody we shouldn't be dealing with, and our lives are overtaken by some kind of criminal scenario. That to me is more unnerving and much more interesting than the classic rise and fall of the gangster saga. So they're crime movies, but they're not primarily or almost never about gangsters. They're about regular people, male protagonists often. And remember, the male in American movies was almost always heroic and untouchable. But all of a sudden, the man is being taken off his pedestal. He's not in control of his destiny. There's a fate out there with a capital F that's overseeing his destiny. And that's unnerving and sort of fascinating. And then the role of women shifts in response to that weakened male image.
I guess one of the other big differences too is that in the crime films of the 30s, crime can't pay. Like the gangster's downfall has to be the end of the film. Justice has to prevail, and that's not always the case in noir.
Well, well, Ryan, it is up to a certain point because there was a production code that was started in 1934. And one of the articles of faith of the production code was that crime could not pay. It couldn't. So the criminal could never get away with it. That changed after the production code was replaced in 1968, and criminals in today's films can get away with it. I like to tell students this. The first film in which they got away with it, driving into Mexico with funds, I think, stolen from a bank, is a movie called The Getaway.
Ah, yeah, I
They
didn't
got away
realize
with
that. Yes, yeah,
They
yeah.
got away with it in The Getaway, and you can get away with it ever since. But in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and at least into the mid 60s, you couldn't get away with it. So people paying their money to see a crime film would know that if there was a bank heist, the robbers or would-be robbers were not going to be successful. That crime could never pay.
So to come back to the personal element of noir and the individual and his inexorable descent into doom, I've heard film noir described. I don't know where I saw this, but film noir described as blue collar Greek tragedy. What do you think about it? Do you agree or disagree?
That's a good, very quotable statement. I wish I'd written it. I
Oh,
didn't.
I wish I did too. I don't know where I
Yeah.
found that.
Isn't that a good one? Yes, I would agree with that. Yes. And that gives the audience a point of identification because the people in those in some of the best of the film noir I like best are people you understand or can identify with. They're not remote figures or on a pedestal or beneath us. They're sort of us. And what could happen to us if we had some bad luck or made some bad decisions or our worst instincts were followed?
So one of my favorite aspects of noir is the sharp, hard-boiled dialogue. Could you say something about the writers whose work forms the foundation of these films?
Yes, when I was doing my original book, and there wasn't a lot of research at the time, but it wasn't original, but I expanded on it. The hard-boiled writers of the 20s and 30s, crime writers like Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, and by the way, Ernest Hemingway in his very stripped-down style. All of these writers created the hard-boiled tradition of American vernacular, but it was a kind of pulp poetry. It was pulp, but it was poetry. The best of them were really great writers. Edmund Wilson called them, I love this, the boys in the back room. And they were that. They were the boys, almost not always men, but overwhelmingly. And they had a dark, cynical view about crime, but they wrote about crime with a wonderful rhythmic flair. They're good writers. And the dialogue in their books is hard boiled, terse, cynical, sarcastic. And in the best of film noir, that's the quality of the writing, is very terse, but with an edge to it, irony and cynicism. And I guess people have said that's a particularly American flavor. I mean, Hammett and Hemingway are deeply American writers, and they caught an American tone that was very a vernacular, contemporary vernacular sound, but they raised it to the level of poetry.
I was familiar with several of these writers. Like I had a cat I called Dashiell when I was a
Oh,
student, and
really?
I knew Chandler, but you introduced some other ones I hadn't heard of too, like Cornell
Cornell Woolrich?
Woolrich.
Well, he's my favorite. He's my favorite. Uh,
I bought this when I reread your book again this
really?
time, and yeah, I haven't
Which one
cracked
did you
into
buy? Which one do you have?
Desperate Times.
Okay. But Cornell Woolrich is the quintessential noir writer, and his life was so noir. He lived in a hotel room with his mother for most of his adult life. So his life, in his own life, he felt a sense of entrapment an enclosure, and he felt bedeviled by bad luck. He was a terminal depressive. I mean, wonderful noir soil that he grew out of, and those are translated into his stories. His most famous story is the basis of Rear Window, Hitchcock.
Yeah, fantastic film.
Yeah, fantastic film, but it's a film. It's a Cornell Woolrich story.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I read your book.
Yes, yeah. He many of the best film noir are Cornell Woolrich. He's my favorite crime writer. He's an acquired taste. He doesn't quite have the elegance of Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler or the literary flair of Hemingway, but he could tell a story, and it's based on lots of coincidence. Lots of preposterous coincidences and contrivances. You have to allow that. But once you can get over that, you see how good he is about maintaining suspense.
So that was one influence, these hard-boiled writers, and German Expressionism was another. How and why did German Expressionism, of all things, influence film noir?
Okay, that's a good question. The German Expressionist influence comes from emigre directors who fled, most of them Jewish, who fled Hitler, who fled Germany and Austria in the wake of the rise of Hitler and the fascists, and who then had to rebuild their careers in America. Fritz Lang, Otto Preminger, Robert Siodmak, they're three of the great ones, Billy Wilder. What they did was they had to temper full flair German Expressionism from the German Austrian tradition and adapt it to the American Hollywood style. So, but they retained remnants of it in both form and content, a dark sensibility, and the great beauty of film noir is the chiaroscuro lighting. The high contrast between light and shadow, the velvety shadows that hover over the backgrounds in so many of these films, and that seem to represent the sensibility of the characters and of the story world. And that's expressionist. And they temper full bore expressionism, but they add elements that quotes are foreign into the sunnier American Hollywood point of view. And so these quintessential American crime films are inflected with motifs from German Expressionism.
So give some examples for listeners of what would a full-bore expressionist film look like.
Full bore expressionist film would be a Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Do you know that one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. With exaggerated, stylized theatrical sets. It would violate the emphasis on verisimilitude in Hollywood filmmaking. Hollywood wanted to create a world that sort of looked real. And German Expressionism is beyond real. It's nightmare. So they'd have to temper the nightmare elements to have those nightmare elements in a world that looks like the current one, the real world, but with dark undertones. You can see that in the early work of Fritz Lang, Scarlet Street, which is quintessential early noir, Woman in the Window, quintessential early noir. And you can see that it teeters between realism and nightmare, and realism, Hollywood realism, and German Expressionism, and the treatment of the city and the treatment of nighttime, which as emanations of the character's own psychology. Billy Wilder, who made two absolutely quintessential film noir, Double Indemnity and Sunset Boulevard, and you can see the expressionist influence on both of those.
Mm.
The night world that overtakes the day world.
I saw Double Indemnity just this summer on the big screen. There's a cinema here called the Babylon in Berlin, and they did like a month of film noir screenings. So we saw Double Indemnity and The Maltese Falcon. First time to see it on a actual
On a big
projection.
screen.
Fantastic. And I've seen they also do screenings of Metropolis with a live orchestra at this
Oh,
place.
that's great. Yeah.
Uh,
Now that's full scale expressionism in a way that American films of that period couldn't handle. And so to succeed, the German directors had to temper their background, temper their style. And they did adjust. They did adjust. And Fritz Lang is the quintessential figure because he started out with expressionist elements. And by the end of his American career in films like The Big Heat and Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the expressionism is almost completely eliminated. Whereas you can see it pretty strong in the 40s films, but beginning to disappear in the 50s.
So you said that the best example of expressionist style in noir would be Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum. You described it as the most visually experimental and certainly the most intensely expressionist of all American film noir. Could you say something about that? That's one of my favorites as well.
That's a great film, and I'm happy to say when I was doing promotion for my book on the '50s, and sometimes the venue would ask, "What film do you want to show?" If it was just one film or a few films, I would always choose Night of the Hunter,
Hmm.
and it did better business than any other film on any of the '50s festivals. The young people loved it.
What do you think about that appeals to current audiences?
Well, that's amazing because when that film was released in 1955, it was a complete box office disaster.
I find
I remember
that's
seeing
astonishing.
I remember seeing it on the first matinee at a theater in Los Angeles, and there weren't more than a dozen people in a big theater. It was a
Wow.
disaster, disaster. It didn't hit the right note for 1955. But now the kids, my students and the young people who came to the festivals really responded to that film. It's dark poetry. I mean, there are passages in the film, the kids trip down the river. That's among the most beautiful things ever in any American film and highly expressionistic. And that's not a German director, that's Charles Lawton in his only film assignment. And because it didn't succeed, he never got another chance to make a film. He was obviously a great filmmaker.
God, God, think of the possibilities. If that's his first film,
His first film, and it's a masterpiece. And of course, it's Robert Mitchum's finest hour. It's Lillian Gish's finest hour. It's an amazing film. And it is film noir, and it's heavily expressionist and stylized. But it veers between the real world and a stylized version of it. It goes back and forth between day and night and reality and dream. And that's part of the visual intoxication of the film. It just sort of doesn't look like any other movie.
yeah, it really feels like you're in a nightmare a lot of the time.
It
Especially
does.
that river scene, especially, and
Oh,
the way it echoes. Yeah.
it's one of the great passages in American films. Yeah. As good as anything ever done.
So that kind of brings up a distinction that you draw as well between studio films and location films. You describe this as noir's private and public modes. So could you say more about this, the difference between these two, the studio films and
It,
and
it
the public
well,
ones?
to oversimplify, but there's some truth to it. In the early part of noir in the '40s, the studios, for the most part, were making films on the lot. There was a prejudice against location shooting. The moguls who ran the studios got nervous if the film went on location because then they couldn't exert the same kind of oversight and control. And so part of the aesthetic of the filmmaking of the time was that you shot on the back lot. In the '50s, there began to be much more location shooting. That gave a very different feel to it. You were in the real world rather than the studio world. Look at the way the city is handled in Scarlet Street, the quintessential Fritz Lang film. That's not the real city. That's a studio created city, and it has a kind of dreamlike quality of a of an artificial set. And then you see the real Los Angeles in a very good crime film from the 1950s called Crime Wave. And shot on location, it doesn't have the same chiaroscuro modeling or expressionist intensity. It's set in what's closer to a real world. And I think that changed film noir. It brought it into the real world, but it changed some of the style. I would say an exaggeration, a generalization, but there's some truth to it. In the '50s, film noir became a little less stylized. Although the last great film noir, one of the last great ones, Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, is one of the most stylized film noir ever made, shot on location in Venice, California, masquerading as a Mexican border town.
It's interesting that became came full circle in that way. Why do you think that was?
That's the genius of Orson Welles. That's a one-off. And they
Mm.
didn't know what to do with it when it was released. I remember seeing it on the bottom half of a double bill in Los Angeles.
On the
Like,
bottom half.
bottom half of a double bill. The main feature was the female animal. Nobody remembers it. Hedy Lamar's last film. And the
Wow.
second feature was, oh, we're just showing this as second feature, or Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. I saw it the first week, and I knew it was a great film. and so did everybody else. It was discovered right away. Universal didn't know what they had, but we film goers who love film noir, I don't think we were calling it film noir at the time. We knew what we were seeing in that film.
So the other thing with these location films, they also a lot of them started taking the form of pseudo documentary kind of police procedurals, where
Yes,
the
that
focus is on the
happened in the late
technology.
40s. That
Yeah.
happened in the late 40s, emphasis on technology. A very good film called North Side 777. Do you know that one?
Yep.
Which is a kind of pseudo documentary with expressionist moments, though, with some stylized treatment of the city at night. Very effective, but a lot of it's procedural with an emphasis on technology and hunting down the criminal. And Louis de Rochemont, the famous producer of the time, introduced that motif in noir, and that continued into the 50s. I don't know that it was a major movement, but it was. The films had a certain vogue at the time. Yes.
I don't think those date very well compared to the others. There's an earnestness about them, that's public service messages at the beginning. This is why crime won't pay children. And I'm always cheering for the criminals in those films.
You don't want the earnestness.
No, I mean, I know they're not going to get away with it, but I kind
Yeah,
of hope they do.
yeah. You almost always hope they do. One of the two great heist films. I'm a fan of heist films, but the two great heist films, The Asphalt Jungle and The Killing.
Yes.
It's true. You're rooting for the criminals to get away with it, and you feel bad for them.
Well, especially the
For the
Asphalt
most part.
Jungle. The ending of that is such a great ending. He
Oh,
makes it to the
oh,
farm, his vision of this childhood paradise, and then just dies on the spot.
and then dies on the spot. Yeah, it's almost a tragedy. You feel for him. You feel for that character, and you feel for all of the characters. That this, I was just thinking about it the other day. I don't know why it came to me, but in The Asphalt Jungle, Louis Calhern has a sick wife upstairs, and she asks him to stay with her. He has criminal activity in mind. He hasn't told her. She asks him to stay with her. She's very nervous and she's an invalid. Can you stay and play a card game with me? It's so touching. And you feel his dilemma and the tragedy of this man who's made a fateful decision. And his life is going to be over because of his decision. A man of prominence and money and wealth, and his greed got the best of him. But you feel for him and you're rooting for him. Hitchcock liked to play around with that. He wanted us to side with the criminal.
Mm.
You know, the guilt is spread around. The guilt from the characters that's transferred to the audience, and so we and in The Killing, you side with the criminals, and you know they can't get away with it, but you sort of want them to.
Mm.
So these films let out our own antisocial impulses. If they're acting out these impulses, we don't have to. They're doing it for us vicariously.
Yeah, very much in the same way as Greek tragedy. Yeah, that's interesting. So you said that you mentioned the city in noir, the city being an important backdrop. So why are noir stories essentially city stories?
They're not always, of course,
Mm.
and there are country noir, but I think the city as the place of crime, or the portrait of the city as menacing, I think that comes from the hard-boiled tradition I was talking about. Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler are poets of cityscapes,
Mm.
whether San Francisco, Los Angeles, or New York, or Chicago. That the city became, in crime fiction, was the locus of criminal activity. The criminals rose in the city, not in the country. I think the division between city and country, the city is corrupt and the country is much less open to corruption. I think it comes from that.
Mm. Yeah, the sense of a modern wasteland and the disorder and the
Yes.
chaos of the city and those menacing buildings hanging over you and the potential for these shadows. It works very well there.
And in some of the great film noir, the buildings do loom over the characters. There's a great and unknown film noir from 1950 called Side Street.
Yes, I've seen it.
You've seen that.
Hmm.
The looming buildings seem to trap the luckless protagonist, and he's this little figure in these huge downtown Wall Street buildings looming over him, threatening him. So the city becomes a kind of antagonist as well as the locus of crime.
I really came to appreciate the way the framing and the sets were done after reading your book. Like you said, among American film genres, noir has the most consistently high standards of visual design. And you wrote about the asymmetry and the angularity in the shots, and high angle overhead shots that just convey vulnerability,
Yeah.
and the way that some characters are framed from below, so it seems like the ceiling and the frame is pressing in on them.
Yes. The directors who understood noir, claustrophobia, and entrapment had ceiling shots in their films. So a low angle, you have the character, but above the character is that ceiling hanging over him. It's like a visual embodiment of the relentless fate that tracks the luckless noir protagonist.
Yes, it's so incredibly well done. Like, it's not just the lighting, this dark lighting that gives us oppressiveness, but the whole framing and the
The
set
sense of
closing you.
space, the mise en scène, the sense of enclosure and entrapment, all of that.
You also wrote about how the use of mirrors suggesting doubleness and loss of identity and confusion as well. That's really effective.
Mirror shots are rampant in film noir. And the best of them often have a lot of mirror shots. Lots, and those are hard to do technically. How do you get the camera out of the mirror shot? Those are hard to do, but they're brilliantly managed in the best of the film noir.
What about this? The lighting. We forget sometimes. I think now that film was shot on film. So how hard was it to capture those gradations of darkness on film at that time?
Well, I think some of that, the lighting virtuosity, was sometimes a way of camouflaging that the sets were so bare because some of these films were below budget, but you could sort of disguise the absence of a really good or detailed set with virtuoso lighting. And so the focus of your shot becomes the chiaroscuro and not the background detail. It was a very skillful kind of camouflage for a very low budget. There's a very good film noir, a cult favorite called Detour. Do you know that?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And there are famous shots of shadows and fog and lighting that disguise the fact that this production was so low budget there were almost no sets, no street scenes. But if you lit it dramatically, you what was important was the flare of the lighting and not the detail of the setting. And so that was a trick that some of the B units found out. Good, good virtuoso flashy lighting could cover over the absence of real sets.
Very interesting. You said also that the most consistently stylized acting in American genres is film noir. Could you give listeners a sense of what that means?
I'm not sure I would agree with that statement now.
Hmm. So why not?
It is stylized, and in the 40s particularly, I think there was what was known as a sort of sleepwalking style, where the acting seemed deadpan or dead-faced, as if the actors were covering up for something going on inside, but didn't want to reveal it. They seemed like sleepwalkers in a way. And I think I was referring to that as a stylized genre. The hard-boiled dialogue required a certain style of delivery. But I'm not sure that I could say it's the most stylized. There was a style in film noir, an acting style that was needed, the Humphrey Bogart style. He was a great stylist. He was such a good actor that he never let you he never let you be aware that he was acting. You never caught him acting. But it was his clipped delivery, the hard-boiled delivery, was very stylized. And a lot of the private investigators, the Dick Powells who followed the Humphrey Bogarts, delivered the dialogue in the same way. So there was a kind of vernacular style which had a poetic flair to it, and the sleepwalking style, but it had to still evoke something lifelike in the acting because you couldn't have pure style in American movies. Your audience had to identify with the characters as being real.
Mm.
So I don't know that I push. There was a style, but I'm wondering if we're so used to it now that it doesn't look like style anymore. They set the model for a certain kind of hard-boiled delivery, of terse, cynical, and it had a certain verbal flair. And I do think that Humphrey Bogart's style sort of permeated movie acting style. So I'm wondering if it doesn't look so much like style anymore. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm not. I remember writing that years ago. We're talking about a book written years ago, but I'm not sure I would write it in the same way now. I'd qualify it more.
Mm. No, but I think that's exactly how I took it. This sort of tense and tight-lipped style of Humphrey Bogart, but he could convey quite a lot with a very minimal movement of his
Very
face.
minimal, and conveyed an inner life quite a lot. And he was an actor who didn't make any fuss about acting. And when he appeared in his last movie, The Harder They Fall, with Rod Steiger, who was a
Hmm.
method actor and who tortured everything because he had to have an inner life and a through line and what are my goals, Humphrey Bogart would just stand there looking at him, and Bogart wouldn't do anything, and Rod Steiger was acting up a storm. It's interesting to see these two divergent styles in the same shot. Bogart thought Rod Steiger was ridiculous. Thought he was overly detailed, and he made too much of a fuss about every motive and scene. And Bogart just stood there and delivered his lines. And he's the one who's more believable. This
Right.
very
Yeah.
simplified, minimalist style, as opposed to the actorly style of Rod Steiger. Fascinating comparison between two divergent styles in the same movie. You can see Bogart just standing there, sort of looking at him. And I know off stage he felt, this guy is too much.
So, who are your favorite noir actors?
Well, I was hoping you'd ask. My all-time favorite film noir, my all-time number one, and it has my favorite film noir performance. I'm building up to the answer. You're looking. Have I seen this film?
Hmm.
It's from 1952. I just showed it. So I try to program it whenever I can, and audiences always respond as I want them to. Joan Crawford in Sudden Fear.
Ah, I don't
Do
know
you
if I've
know that
seen
film?
that. I don't know if I've seen that. Let me consult your book here. I would have marked it off if I did.
She plays a a playwright who
Yes.
marries
Okay. Yeah.
an
Yeah. Yeah.
actor. You've seen it?
Yes. And he
But
wants to kill her.
her husband plots with his girlfriend, played unforgettably by Gloria Graham,
Ah,
to
yes.
kill this woman. He's married, but he's married her for his money. And then she concocts a revenge scheme. It is my favorite, my single favorite film noir. And Joan Crawford's performance is classic old style Hollywood. It is an extraordinary star performance, a star vehicle, a drop dead star vehicle. And I swear by that film. I saw it in 1952 when I was a kid. I loved it. And then it was out of circulation for many years. There were rights issues that made it unavailable. And then after decades, it became available again. And I was afraid to see it because I worried that what I had liked as a kid wouldn't hold up.
Hmm.
And I was thrilled to find out I was right. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I remember. It's coming back now that you started
It's coming
describing
back.
it.
It's a great film. It's classic noir because for about the first half hour, you wonder, is this a film noir? What's he talking about? Then, when she discovers the plot against her, the style of the film shifts and we're into noir. And it ends with a 10 or 15-minute chase scene in the real streets of San Francisco. That's the best treatment of a city at night that I've ever seen to this day.
All right, I'm gonna go back and look at this one again. I probably still have it here.
I hope so. Let me know what you think. It's my favorite.
All right.
That's number one.
For me, my favorite actors, apart from Bogart, of course, I would say Edward G. Robinson, one of my all-time favorite
Terrific,
actors.
terrific. Barbara Stanwyck,
Barbara Stanwyck,
great in film noir,
Robert Mitchum, uh,
great in film
Out of
noir.
the
Perfect.
Past, fantastic.
Now,
Burt
Out
Lancaster.
of the Past, everybody loves that film.
Mm.
I don't.
No, why?
I don't. I don't even care for it. I think the plot gets so complicated I can't figure out what's happening. And
Mm.
after a point, I don't care.
I just like Robert Mitchum, I think. So,
He's terrific, and Jane Greer's terrific.
and
But
another one too,
I
Robert
thought
Ryan, I like, and I like Robert Ryan, and I like Sterling Hayden, who I noticed he doesn't come up very much in your book in the section on actors. Why?
that's wrong. That's wrong because he gives two great noir performances
Yeah, the Asphalt Jungle.
in Asphalt Jungle and The Killing. He's fabulous. Yes,
So, if you were to do it again, would you include?
I would include him. He's terrific. Absolutely terrific.
In terms of actresses too, we should mention Ida Lupino, and you mentioned Gloria Graham and Veronica Lake.
Gloria Graham is my all-time favorite.
Same for me. Yeah.
There's only one Gloria Graham in the world. She
Hmm.
was unique, one of a kind. She looked and sounded and moved like nobody else. She was fabulous. And Sudden Fear is her finest hour.
Hmm.
She's just unforgettable in that film. Just terrific. And always with an underlying sense of amusement. She had a sense of humor. She won the Academy Award that year for Bad and the Beautiful. Year of Sudden Fear, but I'm sure everybody saw Sudden Fear. And they saw a woman who can do Sudden Fear and Bad and the Beautiful in the same year. She's the best of the year.
Yeah. So all of this stuff is quite 40s and 50s a long time ago. What's the influence of film noir today?
They still make them. The neo
And
noir.
do you think neo noir holds up as well as the classic film noir? I don't either.
Not at all. Not at all. No. Some of them are good, but they're different. They're in color. They're in widescreen. The sense of pacing and storytelling is different. But the thing is, noir proved to be more elastic than I think people thought. That it wasn't just telling the same story over and over again. There was room for variation on the theme, and that helped a lot. So a genre to last has to bend a little. It has to be flexible, and noir turned out to be pretty flexible and popular. They're still making them. We don't call them noir. Classic era noir is early 40s, late 50s, early 60s. That's classic era. And then Point Blank in 67 is sort of the beginning of what we've called neo-noir. Do you know that film, Ryan?
Point blank.
Point Blank?
Describe it for me.
Lee Marvin,
Oh yes, yes, yes. And
Angie Dickinson.
and we're not sure whether he's actually died or is dying the entire time. That's fantastic.
Yes, yeah, but it's very different from classic noir, and
Mhm.
hardcore fans of classic noir might not care for it.
Mm.
Different sensibility. We're in the
Yeah.
60s in Point Blank.
Yes, it feels 60s.
It feels 60s. We're not in the 40s, the 50s anymore. The storytelling mechanisms are different.
So was the classic era of film noir, did that predate and influence the French crime films, Rififi, Bob Le Flambeur, these kind of films?
Very good question, because tonight I'm introducing a film noir on Long Island called Elevator to the Gallows.
Yeah.
You know that one with Jean Moreau and Maurice Ronet? Fabulous.
Yeah, really good.
58, which is the end of classic Hollywood noir, but is it the beginning of French noir? So yes, these films influenced a French name for an American style. The American style then influenced French filmmaking. 1960, Breathless.
Yes.
It's a tribute to Bogart, but through a French lens, obviously.
Hmm. And this is a whole other genre we could explore, but
Yeah.
I want to talk about the 50s. So film noir came to an end in the mid to late 50s, as you've said, the classic era, and so did the studio system and many other things, which is the topic of your most recent book, Hollywood and the Movies of the 50s. So
Yeah.
many of my fantastic reading. Many of my listeners won't be familiar with the way films used to be made. So what was the studio system and how was it done back then?
Well, the studio system was an industrial system. Each major studio was run by a mogul. Some of the names are still very famous: Louis B. Mayer, Harry Cohn, Darryl Zanuck, Howard Hughes, who was a nutcase. And they had their own contract personnel: directors, cinematographers, designers, actors. And they had their own story departments, and each studio specialized in certain kinds of movies. MGM was known primarily for musicals. RKO was the great noir studio. There were more great film noir from RKO than any other studio. And 20th Century Fox in the 50s became known for the big spectacles and CinemaScope that saved the industry. But the studio system was accused of restraint of trade. And because they made their films, they exhibited their films in their own chain of theaters. So they produced, exhibited, distributed. It was considered restraint of trade. They had to sell off their theaters. Paramount had its own theater chain. MGM had the Lowe's theater chain. They had to sell them off. And once that happened, the chains could be open to any independent filmmakers, so that there wasn't block booking anymore. So the studios had to compete, and they knew it was the beginning of the end of the financial system. So what happened is no more contract personnel, and the studios became interchangeable one from the other. I mean, there's still entities known as Fox and Universal, but they bear no relationship to the studio era, Fox, Universal, Columbia, Major, Minor. They're interchangeable now. The studio system was a very good way of making movies, but its days were always numbered because of the issue of restraint of trade, control, monopoly.
So you said at the time, they each had a recognizable house style in addition to
If you
these
were
genres.
if you were an avid film goer like my friends and me, we could spot an MGM film from a Fox film, from a Universal film, crazy as that sounds, from an RKO film, by setting, by actors on the screen, by kinds of story, by the look of the film. Each studio had its own design and look. It could be subtle, but for us movie nuts, we got it.
That's pretty interesting. Can you give me an example of a house style, how that would
If
work?
you looked at Singing in the Rain,
Hmm.
5 minutes, any movie fan of the time could say that's an MGM musical. If you looked at The Robe, a biblical film in widescreen CinemaScope, the sets, the look of it, the color, 20th Century Fox.
It's
You
interesting.
could go down the line. I'm not saying unfailingly so, but pretty good guess.
So, in addition to this, the Paramount decree that and the antitrust case against these studios and the selling off of the theaters, he said that in 1950, Universal signed a contract with James Stewart that gave him a percentage of the profit from his films. So, how did that change the industry?
That was another major death blow. Because if the actors could get participation, then actors under contract, and they did get angry. James Stewart got a fabulous payday because one of the films he was signed for, called Winchester 70, against all odds and expectations, turned out to be a huge hit. That actor made enormous amounts of money because of the participation deal. Other stars wanted the same thing. Get me out of my contract, negotiate on a per picture basis. I can do much better financially with an agent representing me on each film than I can under contract, where there were limits to salary increase. Beginning of the end, and the moguls knew it. But it also, a problem was television, because television took away so much of the regular film-going audience. Did you know that the biggest numbers for film-going were during the war years in the 40s?
Hmm.
Or more people went to the movies almost round the clock in some cases during the war years than they have ever since. I
Despite
mean,
so many people being overseas and posted abroad.
like people here wanted to go to the movies. Remember, there was no television. There was no internet. Movies were the primary entertainment medium. So in the 50s, the moguls realized that we're losing our audience. If our industry is going to be saved, we're going to have to change our approach. So they introduced new technologies, 3D, CinemaScope, VistaVision, Cinerama, widescreen, color, spectacle, and new content. Because otherwise, people are going to stay home and they're not going to come out and pay for our movies. So the movies of the 50s were very experimental in terms of a range of subject matter and a range of formats. For me, I grew up in the 50s, so I'm partial to it. I think the 50s is the most exciting decade in American filmmaking. It's certainly better than the nightmare of where we are now.
Oh yeah, well, I want to come to that as well. But
Yeah.
that's one of the things that surprised me about your book. I didn't realize there were so much technical experimentation, Cinerama, VistaVision, CinemaScope, and 3D as well.
And 3D as well, which I love. People don't like it, and it didn't last in 53. And every time it's revived, there's a resistance to it. And I ask my students, do you like 3D? Most of them don't. They don't like the surcharge. They don't like wearing the glasses. People still say it's hard on the eyes. I love 3D then and now. The 3D in the 50s was used the medium format better than today, frankly.
In what way?
Some Well, a lot of the films today are not shot in 3D. They're 3D conversion. When
Hmm.
you get a feed 3D film from the 50s, there's a greater sense of depth often, and I liked emergence. Now you can't have things going out at you all the time, but when they do, I like it. I went to see Superman, the latest Superman in 3D. When I was in LA recently, I had to hunt down a 3D theater where it was playing. But I was disappointed in the 3D. I wanted Superman to fly through the screen and over the audience, but he doesn't do that. In the 50s, he would have emerged from the screen. I don't think they use 3D as creatively as the original cycle of 3D did. The films, but for the most part, did not do well, and it lasted little more than 2 seasons. They thought it would save the industry, and it didn't do that at all. But widescreen, not Cinerama, but CinemaScope, did take. That did save the industry,
So
at
is that
least
the
in
basis
widescreen films.
this is the basis of what we see now, is it not?
Yeah,
Why
widescreen films are
that's the
still
norm.
popular. IMAX.
Yeah.
But before that, it was always the Academy ratio, which was very boxy, and widescreen films presented the image in a new format. I loved it. Not everybody loves widescreen either, but I think for widescreen, you need to know how to use long shots and long takes. And filmmakers today think just in terms of close up, close up, close up, cut, 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 cut. So they misuse the widescreen because they don't have, I think you need the long take and the long shot as the basis of the widescreen cinematography. But contemporary directors don't see it that way.
That's something I really hate about some current films, especially some of the television based or the streaming ones, that rapid cutting where it's sometimes not even a second in between cuts. It's for short attention spans, I guess, or a TikTok generation.
That's for short attention spans, a generation with a attention deficit syndrome. There is something to that. We're all glued to our phones. We know that we can scroll and change an image in a second. And there's the feeling that if you have a long take, the audience is going to get restless. You look at the older films, the pacing is very different from the pacing of today.
Now you look at something like Bergman with these long, deep close-ups on just a face for
And
quite a long
today,
time.
just as you say, cut, 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 cut. It's to energize the audience. It's not necessarily to energize the film. It's to energize the audience for fear that the contemporary viewer is going to be bored in a second. No attention span. To change the image gives you a headache, and the camera
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
What's wrong with the camera just sitting there and asking the audience to look at a widescreen image and notice this and that in the background on the side? You don't have that kind of responsibility anymore. It's spoon fed to you with close up, close up, close up. I'm out of phase with the contemporary world and filmmaking, and I have to say, living in a world in which a movie like Noir got the Oscar for Best Picture is to me horrifying. I thought that film was repellent on every level.
I didn't see it. I hardly watch anything new, to be
Oh, you
honest.
don't watch anything new?
Almost nothing. We watch mostly older films. I just don't. One of the things, and it came up in your book actually. You've got a great quote about this. You said artistic quality cannot be measured solely in terms of how any single film satisfies or disappoints politically engaged viewers. The making of art and the obeisance to ideological purity often have little to say to each other. So apart from the aesthetics now, in some ways it feels like we've come back to a new version of this where like prioritizing ideology over art just makes these shows unwatchable. I just see the greasy fingerprints of this all over it, shoving an ideology down my throat with like the same blunt obviousness of communist realism and about as much enjoyment.
Yes, and I think we're moving away from it now, but the Academy that has a lot to answer for was saying your film cannot even be considered for a Best Picture nomination unless it includes a person of color, a a trans character, or a disabled character. It's wonderful if filmmakers want to make films about those characters and subjects. Of course,
I agree.
as a demand for you have to have something of those elements in your film, even to be considered for a Best Picture nomination. What kind of a world is that? It doesn't make any sense. You can't restrict what an artist or filmmaker wants to say. If a filmmaker makes a film that you find the subject matter repellent, don't go.
Exactly right.
There you hate it.
Don't.
I saw Noir. I hate that movie. I think it's an abomination. Fine. I don't say people shouldn't go to see it. People should be free to make films on any subject they want, and audiences should be free to respond any way they want. Ideology and art don't necessarily connect at any point.
So do you see any overtones here or echoes of the era of the blacklist,
Yes,
which you write about in the book?
I do. I do. But it's now a blacklist from the left, not from the right.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Restraints imposed by the left, not by the right. And in the 50s, the blacklist, which was, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about the impact of the blacklist. That was a horrifying period. Horrifying. And I feel the criminals of the period were the so-called House on Un-American Activities Committee that asked questions I don't feel they had a right to ask. Are you now or have you ever been? And if you answered, yes, I was a communist, I'm not a communist anymore, okay, you're not through. In order to be saved, in order to go back to your career, who are the people who were in meetings with you? What a
That's the
terrible
worst.
question to ask. And when I did my research, the true horror was they already knew who the people were.
Yeah.
They had the lists. It was a way of shaming the witnesses,
Yeah, just a way of breaking you.
a way of breaking you. And then somebody like Kazan, Elia Kazan, the great director of the period, who didn't want to name names in his first testimony, but who did in his second, reluctantly, but then rationalized it, was vilified for the rest of his life. And that somehow overcame the extraordinary contribution that he made to film. I mean, his direction of On the Waterfront, which is my single favorite film of the
Mm,
50s,
right.
and contains what I think is the greatest performance ever put on screen, Marlon Brando and as Terry Malloy, uh, is vilified because he was a cooperative witness. I mean, that happens today where you're canceled if you've done something terrible, or you know, the, I've written a book on Woody Allen years ago, and I updated it twice. And I get no requests for any comments about Woody Allen at all. And a friend of mine who's just published a big biography of Woody Allen said, publisher threw up its hands as if he's been condemned and ostracized and canceled. And and he's never been found guilty in a court of law, but his work has been canceled in this country.
It's a
Canceled.
it's a situation where the accusation is enough to destroy somebody and there's no possibility of redemption.
The
There's no
accusation,
forgiveness and no way back from it.
no, the accusation has been enough, and he's one of America's great filmmakers. But he remains in this country more or less silenced.
So
And
you would have been pretty young at the time of the House on American Activities Committee and all this stuff in the film world, but do you remember what it felt like?
I remember as a kid in class, we were indoctrinated with fear of communism. That the Red Menace sensibility was permeated American life in the 50s. A great fear of communist takeover because there was the widespread belief that communists planned to infiltrate this country and that you had to be very careful because anybody could be a communist, your neighbor, your friend, your husband, your father, your son. And there's a fabulous film, not fashionable, called My Son John.
Mm.
And guess what my son John was?
Interesting.
And this is a Christian family. They are horrified by the revelation that Sean is a communist. It's not a fashionable film, and it's vilified. It's an essential film for understanding the America of 1950s, and it stars the great stage actress Helen Hayes. An extraordinary performance. The film was hated in 1952, and it's still vilified. And I had trouble getting it screened on any of the festivals I did in promotion for this book. Nobody
Wow.
wanted to screen it.
Wow. That
It's sort of
surprises me.
silenced. It's been censored because it was made by director Leo McCarey, who was a renowned director, who was a committed Christian conservative. And he made this film because he believed it. It's an extremely well acted and well made film that says things that people might not, many audiences wouldn't want to hear. But don't we have to listen to the other side?
Well, even just as a snapshot of the time to
As a
understand it, to
snapshot of
understand what people thought back then, you don't have to agree with them, but it's essential to try to put yourself in that position and try to understand why they thought that way.
absolutely. Why? But I remember as a kid, I guess you could say we were all indoctrinated with fear of what the Russians had in store for us. They were our enemy. We were locked in a war. It was us versus them, and we had to be on guard against communist takeover.
Well, I mean, I can relate to that a little bit. I grew up in the Cold War, so I remember being a little kid in the 70s and especially in the 80s where you just expected the missiles to be coming over at any point. And that was a real fear. I mean, I lay awake at night thinking about that when the day after came out. And I just
Yeah.
saw, I was too young to even watch it. My parents wouldn't let me, but I saw the trailers and that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
That kept me awake at night.
So you can identify with it from a later period,
Yeah, I
but
can
that's
relate
what
to
we
that.
50s kids were indoctrinated with. And I've heard recently from a, somebody who wants to present next year in America and the anti-communist films of the 50s, which are dismissed. And he cites my book as giving the films a fair shot. So there are films like The Red Menace. I was a communist for the FBI. I married a communist. And these films, to get a flavor of the period, they shouldn't be dismissed. Look at them. You don't have to like them, but look at them. What do they say? How do they say it?
I came away from this book with an enormous list of films I hadn't heard of or
Oh,
seen before,
good,
so I'll be tracking a lot of
good,
these down. One
good.
thing that really interested me too, when you talked about the new diversity of subject matter that was coming up as the studio system came to an end, you said that New York became an important center of underground independent filmmaking, and that they pursued strategies of hyperrealism. What did you mean by that, and what was going on there at the time?
Well, I'm thinking in particular of one of my all-time favorite films. Do you know it, Little Fugitive?
No.
You don't know, 'cause that should be on your list, top of your list. That is it's in a semi-documentary style, shot entirely on location in Brooklyn and Coney Island. A little kid goes to Coney Island, and you get this documentary flavor of Coney Island in the early 50s. It is an extraordinary film. I remember seeing it as a kid. I'd never seen anything like it. And it had a new flavor of realism. And Jean-Luc Godard said, our own French New Wave would not have happened the way it did without the influence of Morris Engel and Ruth Orkin's extraordinary 1953 Little Fugitive.
Ah, interesting.
It's a fascinating film. There were Lionel Rigossen on the Bowery, shot on location on the Bowery. So there was this semi-documentary movement based primarily in New York, which had an influence on the quotes realism because it's stylized realism of the French New Wave. So this
Was was that at the time that Cassavetes' first film came out as well?
shadows,
Shadows, that's right.
yes, shadows, and that's very much in this tradition. Very much shot on location in New York, sort of documentary feel, as if the hidden camera quality to it. That introduced a new level of realism as method acting, which is very much part of the 50s, introduced a new level of psychological and emotional realism in American films of the time.
So how did that change things? Can you give an example of
Well, well, James Dean, Marlon Brando, and Montgomery Clift were the three great exponents of the method as it pursued at the Actors Studio. Uh, Introduced a new level of psychological realism, greater depth, interiority, the sense of the character's inner life. Look at On the Waterfront. That's all about what's going on inside the mind of Terry Malloy, what he's thinking before he makes his testimony, what's going on in his mind that changes. It's all about the inner life of that character. And then he testifies, and he's a friendly witness. And of course, that's a reflection of the fact that the director, Kazan, and the screenwriter, Bud Schulberg, were both friendly witnesses. This isn't about communism, it's about a corrupt waterfront union, but the film is about the importance of testifying.
So we already said that film noir approached the end of its classic period in the 50s. Other genres died out at this time too, more or less. Musicals and ancient world epics and melodramas also faded away. The peak period, at least. So why did they vanish at that time? Were they just of their time?
That was the end of their life cycle, and it was convenient that it happened at the end of the 50s. Not We historians like to date things immaculately, but you can't do it exactly. But you mentioned musicals. It wasn't musicals that died out. It was original musicals. Musicals written for the screen. Singing in the Rain, which many feel is the greatest of all movie musicals, that wasn't based on a stage production. That was written for the screen. American in Paris, written for the screen. Gigi, written for the screen. Then in the 60s, there were a lot of musicals based on great Broadway hits: West Side Story, Sound of Music, Oliver, My Fair Lady. They all won Oscars. They weren't original to the screen. It was the original musicals that died. Melodramas came to a head in the greatest of all melodramas, and conveniently 1959, Imitation of Life. Do you know that one?
Yes, yeah.
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 Greatest tearjerker I've ever seen. Shameless tearjerker. I show it to students still, and it never fails to elicit tears. I say to myself, when I show Imitation of Life and the students don't cry or they begin to make ideological objections, it's probably time for me to move on. I mean, way past retirement age, I'm still teaching, and hasn't happened yet.
One of the things that surprised me too, but from your book, was you mentioned that the 50s spawned new genres as well as putting an end to old ones. And I was surprised to learn that before the 50s, there weren't any made in Hollywood science fiction films.
No.
This all started then.
People are surprised about that. But the first real science fiction film in Hollywood is Destination Moon, conveniently released in 1950. And why was there an explosion of science fiction in the 50s when there hadn't been before? The atom bomb, which led to Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and the times were ripe for science fiction. The Cold War that we were talking about, a lot of the Cold War tensions weren't expressed directly. They were expressed metaphorically. The great example being Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Isn't that about a communist takeover of an emblematic small-town American community? Everybody turns into pods. And we were told, I remember, communists, they don't go to church, they don't believe in family, they have no feelings, they all look dead-faced. No emotion. Their religion is their political beliefs. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So the times were ripe for science fiction, and there were great ones. The greatest of all, the fear of atomic radiation, is Incredible Shrinking Man. Oh, that?
I've only read about it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, that's a great film. He's touched by atomic radiation, and he shrinks to nothing. A brilliant film.
You've got there's I can't remember the exact quote now in your book. Is it a monologue or something that he says near the end when he's shrinking and withering away to nothing, and he speculates on what will become of him? That was a beautiful passage.
Oh, it's magnificent. It has this exploitation title, Incredible Shrinking Man. How good can that be? With actors you haven't heard of, It's a masterpiece. And I have to say, I remember seeing it on a Saturday matinee at a local theater, and I knew at the time I'd seen a great film. I was pretty good as a kid in recognizing great movies that people dismissed or didn't like. I mean, at the time, Night of the Hunter, Touch of Evil, Sudden Fear, Credible Shrinking Man. I knew these were great movies at the time. Yeah, pat myself on the back.
It's interesting to me too that you, in writing about the 50s, you said, and about how films reflect the culture at the time, that the culture that produces and consumes them, that the decade's track record of upbeat comedies and romances was so slender, where its portfolio of dark genres like noir thrillers and domestic melodramas, these were robust.
That's
What
right.
about what about today? What's that say about today? The kind of films that
Oh my.
we're obsessing over. I
Well,
mean, I don't see any funny comedies for one.
well,
Where are the great comedies today?
where are the great comedies? But in the period I'm talking about, when there are great biblical epics and great film noir and great melodramas, what great comedies were there in the 50s? People say, well, Some Like It Hot,
Yeah.
a very popular comedy. That's one. I don't think the 50s were a good period for comedy.
So period of the great screwball comedies, was that the 40s?
That's the 30s and
Yeah.
40s, not the
Yeah.
50s. That was not a. I. Some people would, I think, have disagreed with me. I don't see great comedies in the 50s at all. I don't think the time was. People say about the 50s is bland decade. Not at all. Not at all. It was a decade riven with conflict. The Blacklist, atomic radiation, there were enormous changes that cultural and scientific and political changes and rifts. And that created, I think, a demand for dark films, not light films. But I don't know if there are any good films of any kind being made today.
What's the obsession with these superhero special effecticals? It's either that or rehash. Just rehashing an earlier film that was great and making a shitty version of it.
Yeah, exactly. And what about the superhero films and the Marvel comic? They all look alike to me. One is
Mm.
interchangeable with the other.
Yeah.
But once in a while, when I was doing promotion for my book, a number of critics said, "Could you? You're very critical of contemporary films. Are there any recent films that you really like?" I said, "Yes, there are three. Number one, Roma. Do you know that film?
Yep.
Number two, Roma. Number three, Roma. That's a great film.
Mm.
Alfonso Cuarón, a great Mexican director."
I like that. And there was one, I can't remember the director's name, Polish director called Cold War. Do you know that one?
No.
I'll have to look it up. I can't remember the director's name, but I can picture the actress. She was beautiful. It's about a couple in communist Poland, and she was a singer, and they escaped to the West, and gradually their marriage fell apart. It's a beautifully shot film. Yeah.
But I did see a very good film recently, and talking about censorship by Polanski, who has
Mm.
pretty much canceled in this country. And the film is An Officer and a Spy, which has not gotten American distribution. It's about the Dreyfus case. It
I
has
was looking
not.
for this. I couldn't find it.
Has it played in Germany?
Not that I've seen. It's possible it has. I could have missed it. I've traveled quite a lot, so I could have missed it, but I've been looking for this.
Well, it played at the Film Forum here in New York and has not gotten an American distributor. And there was even some tension at the forum as to whether there was some objection to its being shown, that the film was in effect being canceled because of Polanski's scandalous past. You can talk about his personal life, but the film he made happens to be an excellent film. And it's a difficult subject, I realize, but there you have it. I mean, I don't think an artist should be canceled.
No, I agree with you. The art and the art we should be able to separate this and
We
look at
can
it
say
on its own
he
merits.
certainly seems to be a terrible guy. I wouldn't want to know him, but he sure is a talented filmmaker. He did the wrong thing. He admitted to it, but he made this really good film, which in fact has been silenced in America.
How many novels would we read today if we canceled writers for being crazy and maladjusted and miserable people?
Or get terrible people. We didn't like their politics, or they had beliefs that we couldn't possibly accept, but they happened to write a great book.
How the libraries would be empty.
Yeah,
Well, I could keep you here all night,
yeah.
but I'm going to ask you my last question. In the epilogue of the book, you wonder whether your subject, the movies of the 50s, would seem as remote and out of touch to current readers and viewers as the silent movie era did in the 50s.
I worry
So,
about that.
so why should my listeners go back and watch these films and the classics of film noir that we talked about earlier?
I would say they're great films. They're As time passes, they may come to seem more and more rooted in the past. They're not Marvel comic films. They don't have the pace and the rhythm of today's filmmaking, which obviously is there for a reason, because it's what audiences expect or want. And I think we have to go back and investigate the films and look at them as fairly and objectively as possible. I mean, I've been a writer and a teacher now for a long time. I'm almost starting my 60th year at Brooklyn College soon. I'm not retiring. I have no plans to retire. So I think I know something about the history of film of this period. And I worry that the films will come to seem dated. And can we get beyond the superficial ways in which they are not of the moment? Can we get beyond that and find something beneath the style, which may seem more and more removed from us? Can we see what the films are saying and how they say it and appreciate them, despite the fact that they may not be up to the minute in former content? I'm concerned about that. I'm worried. That's why I say I show Sunset Boulevard, Imitation of Life to students, and I'm worried that for ideological or all kinds of reasons they won't respond anymore. And I'm waiting for students. On Tuesday, I'm showing Rebel Without a Cause, and Nicholas Ray's daughter is coming to my class. She's a friend of mine.
Ah,
I'm wondering, how are the students going to respond to James Dean? Will he seem mannered? Will he seem like he comes from a different period? Or will he seem, despite the differences in superficial elements, will he be a character they can relate to?
I think the greatest reason for watching these, they're just great films. There's
Yes.
so much enjoyment to be gotten from these films if you just get over our own moral self-righteousness and realize that people thought differently in previous generations and they'll think differently after us.
Let's go 50 years from now, and people look back at a monstrosity called Noir, which I despise, and say, what were people of that time thinking of in honoring this ugly film? What were they thinking of? And never mind Noir. There are ways in which the films of the moment take for granted cultural elements that we may not question now, but 50 years from now, they might say about things we can't spot now. They might say, what were people of 2025 thinking of? We can't know that now. We have to meet again in 50 years and see what what people of the future think about us now. So let's not be so superior about condemning the past, right? We may think we figured things out now, and there'll be ways in which audiences of the future will question us. What were they thinking of? They got it wrong, didn't they know?
I think that's right. Well, thank you for your time, Professor Hirsch, and for your wonderful book on film noir. It's my favorite film genre, and your work has guided me through it and helped me find films I wouldn't have discovered if I hadn't read you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Personal Landscapes. If you like the podcast, please give it a rating on iTunes and subscribe through your favorite app. You can find links to today's podcast and more conversations on Books About Place at ryanmurdoch.com. You'll also find a donate button if you'd like to contribute to the costs of the show. All donations are greatly appreciated.